There comes a moment in life when the struggle is no longer external. Nothing dramatic has happened. No clear crisis. No obvious collapse. Yet inside, something feels heavy. A quiet weight that does not lift with rest. A fatigue that sleep cannot touch. This kind of exhaustion comes from carrying a life that is no longer aligned with the self. You may still appear strong. You may still function well. You may still meet expectations. But somewhere along the way, you learn to move away from yourself in order to survive. And now, the psyche is asking to be heard. In Jungian psychology, this moment is not a failure. It is a turning point, a signal that the inner world has reached a threshold. When the outer life no longer reflects the inner truth, tension begins to build, not to punish you, but to redirect you. Self-abandonment rarely feels like betrayal. More often, it feels like responsibility. It feels like being adaptable, being agreeable, being reasonable. It feels like saying yes when your body says no. It feels like suppressing emotion to keep peace, to stay connected, to be accepted. Slowly, almost invisibly, you learn that belonging requires absence, not total absence. Just enough. Enough to dull your instincts. Enough to silence your needs. Enough to soften your truth. And so you leave pieces of yourself behind. Not because you are weak, but because you are human. Carl Jung believed that whatever the ego refuses, the unconscious remembers. What is not lived consciously does not disappear. It waits. It gathers energy. It becomes a shadow. The shadow is not the dark side of your personality. It is the unseen side, the unlived side, the side that did not fit into the version of you the world rewarded. Your anger may live there. Your grief, your longing, your sensitivity, your assertiveness, your authentic voice. The shadow forms not because something is wrong with you, but because something essential was excluded. When the shadow is ignored, it does not remain silent. It expresses itself indirectly, through emotional reactions that feel disproportionate, through exhaustion that has no clear source, through repeated relationship patterns, through a persistent sense of emptiness that success cannot fill. Jung observed that the psyche always seeks balance. If consciousness becomes too narrow, the unconscious compensates. This compensation is not cruel. It is corrective. Many people spend years trying to outrun this inner tension. They distract themselves. They intellectualize. They stay busy. They numb. But the psyche does not respond to avoidance. It responds to attention. And so the tension grows quietly, patiently, until it can no longer be ignored. This is why breakdowns often arrive unexpectedly. Not when life is hardest, but when the inner truth has been postponed for too long. At some point, the cost of self-abandonment becomes greater than the fear of self-return. And this is where transformation begins. Not in clarity, but in confusion. Not in confidence, but in discomfort. Jung called this process individuation, the slow, often uncomfortable movement toward wholeness. Individuation does not mean becoming better. It means becoming whole. It requires turning inward without judgment, listening without immediately fixing, allowing feelings to exist without rushing to resolve them. This is difficult because the ego prefers control, but the psyche prefers truth. When you begin to listen, something subtle shifts. You notice how often you override yourself, how often you ignore fatigue, dismiss intuition, rationalize discomfort. You begin to see that much of your suffering comes not from life itself, but from the inner division between who you are and who you believe you must be. This division creates tension, and tension creates symptoms. Jung believed that symptoms are symbolic. They are messages spoken in the language of the psyche. Anxiety often signals inner conflict. Chronic irritation may signal unexpressed boundaries. Depression may signal suppressed vitality. Chronic dissatisfaction may signal a life lived for others rather than from the self. These experiences are not punishments. They are invitations. Invitations to become curious rather than critical. When you stop fighting the symptom and start listening to it, something changes. Meaning begins to emerge. And meaning does not erase pain immediately, but it transforms it. The shadow, once approached, begins to soften, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer alone. Integration does not mean acting out every impulse. It means recognizing what lies within you without shame. It means admitting, this exists in me, even if you choose not to act on it. What is acknowledged loosens its grip. What is denied tightens it. This is why repression never leads to peace. Only awareness does. Returning to yourself is not dramatic. It is quiet. It happens in small moments, small decisions, small acts of honesty, resting when you are tired, speaking when something matters, pausing when something feels wrong, choosing truth over habit. You do not need to change your life overnight. You need to change your relationship with your inner world. Each time you listen instead of dismissing, you rebuild trust. Each time you choose alignment over approval, you reclaim energy. Slowly, the psyche responds, not with constant happiness, but with coherence. Things begin to make sense. Your reactions soften. Your boundaries clarify. Your relationships shift, not because others change, but because you do. When you stop abandoning yourself, life does not suddenly become easy, but it becomes honest. And honesty brings relief. The inner war quiets. The need to prove loosens its grip. The endless comparison fades. You no longer feel compelled to become someone else in order to be worthy. This does not make you detached from a world. It makes you present within it. Jung believed that the goal of life is not perfection, but integration, to hold contradictions, to contain opposites, strength and vulnerability, reason and emotion, light and shadow. When you allow yourself to be complex, you stop fragmenting. And when fragmentation ends, vitality returns. The journey inward is not an escape from life. It is preparation for living it fully. Because the self you have been avoiding is not your enemy. It is your source. And when you stop running from it, something subtle but profound happens. You feel grounded, not because life is stable, but because you are. The search outside slows. The hunger for validation fades. And in its place, a quiet sense of belonging emerges, not belonging to the world, but belonging to yourself. And from this place, life begins to feel real again, not because every question has been answered, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. There is a quiet relief that comes when the inner world is no longer treated as an obstacle to overcome, but as a landscape to understand. You stop demanding certainty before taking a step. You stop waiting to feel ready before listening. You stop asking who you should be, and begin asking what is trying to emerge. Jung understood that much of human suffering comes from resisting the very process that could heal us. The ego wants resolution. The psyche wants relationship. The ego asks for guarantees. The psyche asks for presence. When you learn to stay with yourself in uncertainty, something deeper than confidence begins to form. Trust. Trust in your inner signals. Trust in your emotional intelligence. Trust that confusion is not regression, but a necessary loosening of an identity that has grown too small. Many people fear this stage because it feels like losing structure. Old motivations weaken. Old roles no longer fit. What once gave you a sense of purpose may suddenly feel hollow. This can be frightening, but it is also honest. Jung warned that clinging to an outdated self is one of the most common sources of neurosis, not because the self was wrong, but because it has completed its task. There is a mourning in this process. You grieve the version of yourself that worked so hard to survive. You grieve the adaptations that once protected you. You grieve the clarity you thought you had. But grief here is not loss. It is integration. You are not erasing who you were. You are absorbing their wisdom. As this happens, your relationship to effort changes. You no longer force growth. You allow it. You no longer chase meaning. You notice it. You no longer measure your worth by productivity or approval, but by congruence, how closely your outer life matches your inner reality. This alignment does not make life predictable. It makes it livable. You still feel pain. You still experience doubt. But these states no longer define you. They inform you. They become signals rather than threats. And slowly, the nervous system begins to settle. The constant vigilance softens. The background tension eases. Jung believed that when a person lives in alignment with the self, the psyche no longer needs to shout. It no longer needs to sabotage or overwhelm. Symptoms diminish, not because they were eliminated, but because they were understood. This is the paradox of healing. The moment you stop trying to fix yourself, you begin to heal. Returning to yourself is not a single decision. It is a practice, a willingness to listen again tomorrow, a willingness to adjust again next week, a willingness to remain in dialogue with your inner life, even when it disrupts comfort. Over time, this dialogue becomes a relationship, and in that relationship, something precious forms, inner companionship. You are no longer alone inside yourself. And when that happens, the world does not need to complete you. It can meet you because the self you feared confronting was never the source of your suffering. It was the part of you waiting to carry the life you are meant to live.